Right then, hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 4 of The Ginger Gamer. Right, so there's been a bit of a break, and that's because I've taken a bit of a break from YouTube and online and had to do some proper work and stuff. Anyway, you may have seen, if you are on the Prehistoric Kingdom Discord or if you follow me on Instagram, that I finished an area of the Prehistoric City map called the Lido. Now, I think a Lido is something that's common in most countries around the world, but it's basically an outdoor swimming pool. And I was really keen to have one in the map because I think water's always an interesting thing with animals. I think it would look quite interesting to have some dinosaurs exploring a swimming pool. I don't know why. Made it interesting for me, but there's some difficulties and challenges in making a formal water feature in Prehistoric Kingdom, which I will talk about as we go along. Right then, let's start. Now, as you'll see, I once again get the doors out. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I use doors as a way of measuring distance, because doors are an average of about 6 foot 6 inches, and I can do a bit of maths when I decide how big something's going to be, and it's just a good way of getting the scale right. So I'll talk about this as we go along a little bit as well, but I've kind of based this Lido around one that's in the UK, which I will give a link to at some point. Right, so trying to get formal water features is quite hard, because where I think the only real flaw with Prehistoric Kingdom compared to other park zoo making games is water, really. Planet Zoo does water a lot better in that you can build an area and then just fill it with water, which is much easier. Whereas Prehistoric Kingdom, its water is a little bit more like Jurassic World Evolution's water. So the way round it, or at least the way round it I've found, is you make a water area, and then within the water where it's kind of at a constant depth, you build your formal feature. And that's what I did with the canal, which you might have seen with some photos I've released. I've got a canal area in the city, and again I did this in a very similar way to this pond. It's a pool? No, it's definitely a pool. Anyway, so the problem with doing that is, as much as you like to kind of edge up the water feature to your formal structure, you will start encroaching within it, so you can only edge up so far. So a lot of what you've got to do is hiding water that you don't want to be seen with the sides of the pool or the canal, which I made earlier. Now, one of the challenges is when using water in Prehistoric Kingdom is, when you highlight certain aspects that are underwater, you can't always see it until you've then come off them and you've escaped away from them. You won't actually see what you can see underwater, which makes things a little bit tricky. And you'll see in a little bit, I get around it by taking part of it out of the water and then working on it. So that's basic, and this is what I'm about to do now. So this bit of wood that I'm putting here, I'm really just using this as a placeholder, really, so I know where to reposition the pond when I return it to its position in the map. So yeah, I mess up taking it out there. And I take it out, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the lane markings into the pool. Now, there's two ways of doing this, or two ways that I found of doing this. One is you can literally carve up an area to make little spaces to then fit your lanes in, or you can just fit the markings on top of the basic. So when I've made the road features, for instance, which I will talk about in a future video, those lines, the road markings, are actually inside the road level, so I've made holes in the road level to fit them in. In this case, I've done it on top, which for the most part looks okay. When you go under the water, you can kind of see that they're slightly raised, and before I finish this level completely, I will try and lower them as much as possible. I think I've got them about as low as you can before they start to disappear into the bottom of the pond. So lots of kind of copy and pasting, and I haven't really accurately measured the spacings. I kind of think sometimes when you make things, if they look good enough by eye, then they're good enough, you know. They don't need to be perfect a lot of the time, unless other features are going to be dependent on the spacing, and in that case you've got to make it a bit more accurate. But this is neither here nor there, so I've very much free-handed doing this, and then just did a bit of copy and pasting, and then I can put the pond back where it's meant to go, which after a bit of faffing around and making sure everything's grouped together, I do. So as you can see, when you first put it in, you can't actually see the bottom of it, you can just see the water texture. So I line it up as best as I can there, and when I click off it, you can see it, and I think it looks quite good. But as you can see, you can see that they're slightly raised when you go under the water. So I then tried to, as much as possible, fill in around it. And you can kind of get in some problems, I think, with Prehistoric Kingdom, that when you try and remove certainly terrain, if you've got any modular pieces there, it'll only remove it so far. So what I tend to do is take the modular pieces out, then remove the terrain how I'd like it, and then put the modular pieces back. So here is kind of a placeholder surround to the swimming pond, to the swimming pool. I do actually change this a bit later on, but this is just me working out if I've removed enough water really, and how well it's going to work. I don't like the colour or the texture at the moment, so I do inevitably get rid of it. Here's me kind of just practicing with colours, really trying to think what's a better colour. I can't remember if that's the one I end up with. I will find out in a bit. As I say, it's been about a week since I actually finished working on this map and coming around to edit the video. And once again, I'm just trying to test out whether the terrain and the grass is going to work up against where I've got the sides of the pool. I didn't really need to worry actually, because I do extend how wide I have groundwork around the pool. So I didn't really need to worry that much about where the water was. And a lot of this is, although I did the canal, this is kind of quite a lot of trial and error. I wouldn't say this is a how-to way of making a formal water feature in Prehistoric Kingdom. This is very much me just kind of trialing and erroring my way around it. You may know a better way. If you do, please tell me. It would be great for it to be a little bit simpler. And it's something I'd really like the makers of Prehistoric Kingdom to change how they do water. I know that's a big ask, because that, you know, it's not as simple as just deciding to do it differently. You know, it's the way it fits in with the game engine, etc. But I would really like it to be a bit more like the Planet Zoo water, which I think is fabulous. I think it's probably the best part building water, certainly that I've come across, is you can pretty much make a shape and then click in it and the water will fit the shape. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm quite happy. This is me clicking back onto some resource photos, just deciding how I want the edge to be. So I'm now deciding, sort of tiling around the very edge of the swimming pool, and I take a lot of time to decide, as is normal. What I was trying to decide is whether there was a good texture that would work as a tile, or whether I was actually going to make individual tiles. Obviously individual tiles are problematic because they are just, they're more for the map to render when it makes the map, and more likely to hit your frame rates rather than have one large modular piece with a tile with a pattern on it. But in the end I go for individual tiles because they're better, and in fact I change it to, I think, the clay material because it has a nice rounded edge, which is what the tiles around swimming pools tend to have. And I do spend a lot of time doing this. I even put a small amount of gap, which would be mortar in between the tiles, which again I think was probably too much really, but I decided it would look nicer. I don't know why I did that. I was actually during this point laying some tiles in my back garden, and I think that's probably why I decided to go with this as well. I think it's pretty unnecessary and it's a bit messy. And now with that done, it's just a question of going on a bit of copy and pasting spree really, and filling out. I mean, I think it looks pretty good. I didn't spend probably as much time as I'd like looking for exactly the right material to use. I tend to default a lot to the kind of concrete texture because you can have quite a lot of range of colors, and it's much easier to get the right size and connect pieces together because you're not worrying so much about a pattern or a texture on it. It tends to work better. So here I'm just selecting them, and I'm just kind of slightly resizing. Instead of resizing one tile to make it fit, I think it works better to select all of them and then resize them all a little bit, and it fits quite nicely. And then it's just a question of copy and pasting that group around the pool. I do rush this sometimes, which is why I misclick and end up having to do things twice. It's a bit of a I definitely should be more haste, less speed, or less haste, more speed, whichever way around it is. I do tend to be rushing a lot. This is obviously sped up, as I'm sure you can tell, but even within speeding it up, I'm rushing things quite a lot. I like to work quite a fast pace, but I'm not quite dexterous enough for that really. So I'm just making everything fit nicely together, and I'm leaving for kind of corner bits, which I'm not that happy with how I finished out those corner bits, but I think they broadly speaking work. Yeah, so this is starting that first corner bit, and I play around a little bit and decide whether I want to just take one and fit it in properly, or just resize size one to make it fit the space. And yeah, by and large I go for just bespoke in each corner, and having a bit of a curved edge, it makes it look a bit neater. It shows that things aren't exactly accurate, because they should all just fit into one spot, but yeah, I get there in the end. Right, you may have seen a small jump there. That's because I forgot to start filming. Basically, I'm starting to make the surrounding area to the pool, which is places where people sit. Like there's that low wall you can see I've put in, which is where people can sit in between swimming. And there'll be some more sort of decorated areas, like this kind of curved area where there'll be a cafe at one end and somewhere to sit at the other, and eventually a fountain, which I decided to do last minute, and I'll talk about that a bit more when we get to it. So making curved walls is always interesting. Now this brick texture is my favourite texture in the game. But there's a number of problems that I found with it anyway. Other people may have solutions, but one of the things I found with it is when you want really bespoke sizes, it's really hard to have to link the textures up together. You might be able to get it all fitting nicely, but you'll have one brick that's half one colour and half another colour, which you can actually see there, and you can't change the colour of it very much either. Well, you can't change the colour of it at all. You can't change the colour of the texture, so you couldn't have black bricks or whatever. So you're kind of really stuck. So as far as I'm aware, really, to try and do this kind of small curved wall was and then get perfect alignment of the texture and the bricks was going to be nigh on impossible. So I really just tried to do it as well as I could, really. I didn't really worry about getting it perfect. So what I'm basically doing is I'm using the curved shape such as it is. It's not really a curve, it's an amount of straight lines joined together, but I'm using that as a guide for what angle to have my pieces at for this low wall, and sometimes making it a little bit longer. Now if I don't have to make it too much longer, then I'll just stretch it out. If not, you notice later on I add a kind of third section to it and make it slightly smaller. So basically my guide is to stretch or shrink the texture as little as possible. Now, one of the things, I did a post on the Prehistoric Kingdom Discord about sort of features for the game and what I'd like, because obviously it's an in development game. And one of the things I'd really like is when you change this, I mean, one of the great successes of Prehistoric Kingdom is the way you can scale so many objects in the game, which makes being really creative and having lots of different ideas really great. It's fantastic. It's one of the best features in any part building game, and I know lots of other creators have spoken about it. But one of the problems with it is when you say stretch a modular piece to make it bigger, what you do is you stretch the texture as well. Now you don't do that for all things. So for instance, the metal mesh, I can't remember what it's called properly, but the metal mesh doesn't stretch. It just you just make a bigger piece of it and the actual size of the mesh remains the same. And that would be really good if a texture like this brick texture would do the same thing. So when you stretch your modular piece, you just had more of the texture. So each individual brick of the texture remained the same size. And again, if you shrunk the texture, the same thing would happen. Now, I don't know how feasible that would be to put in the game, how that would impact on how the game engine works, I don't know. It would be really nice to have the option of doing either or, of either making the texture bigger or just making there be more of the texture on the modular piece you've created. Either one would be good. Well, having the option to toggle it off, on or off, would be best, I think. But yeah, it would certainly make making this wall a little bit easier, and using some of the more hard to sort of pair up and align textures, it would make it a lot easier. So there's me saving. One thing I wouldn't say about saving in Prehistoric Kingdom, although I've not actually had a problem, I know some people have a problem with saves being corrupted or being lost, and so I basically always save twice. So I've got 2 saves of this map going at one time, and every time I save, I'll save twice. Save once to each save file, and that way if one of the save files becomes corrupted, I've always got a backup. I think it's probably good to do it in any game, because you never know when you might have a corrupted save file. Even the most well-made games can have problems with it. So that's the low wall finished around the first semicircle, and the alignment of textures isn't perfect, but I'm pretty happy with it, really. I could have spent another hour on it, but I didn't really want to. I was really focused on getting the swimming pool right, and everything else was grand. Now I'll talk a little bit about referencing and options I use to as reference for things I'm making in the map, because I'm making a map that's by and large a real world thing. So I basically do some Google image search, find something I like, and then use it. Now by and large I stick to it fairly accurately. Now there's a number of reasons why I wouldn't stick to it accurately, and I will give a link in the description below, or maybe even I'll pop up an image later on of the Lido that I actually copied, or at least based this on. Now there's a number of reasons why I don't follow it completely. One is it might just be really difficult to do within the game. not necessarily impossible, but really difficult, or I might find it really difficult, and I think, oh, I can't do a feature like that. Some of it is because I just think of a better way of doing it, basically, and I don't want it to look like that, so I just make a personal choice. And the third reason is about I'm thinking ahead to when either guests or dinosaurs are going to access that area, and I want to make it a little bit different. So yeah, that's basically why I don't always entirely make it 100% accurate, but it's always useful to have a guide when you're making a particular area, especially if it's a really non-standard area. Now within the map I've got a cinema which is quite heavily based on a real cinema. I've got a hotel which I kind of basically made from scratch. Actually, I didn't use a lot of reference to that, but even things like tower blocks and things like that, which are actually quite easy to make, again I use reference photos because it's so much easier, but I tend to always either simplify them a little bit, or maybe add features to them, or just make them a little bit different because I know I'm going to want a dinosaur or a guest to wander through or past that particular feature. Now I did look back on this bit that I've been doing here and think, why didn't I use the modular piece that's actually curved shape and resize it? And the honest answer is I don't know. I can't remember why I did this. I did think that with the thickness of the wall I could just use square or rectangular pieces and it would all work fine and not be too much of a faff, and I just get it done. But I really should use the curved modular piece that would fit that nicely. When I do the fountain later, I do remember about the curved modular pieces and use them, which would have made sense all along, but ho hum. Yeah, so as I said, I'm putting a fountain in this later, but in the original Lido there's a fountain, and I originally, when I started making the map, wasn't going to put the fountain in for a number of reasons, but eventually, almost at the last minute, I do, and I'm glad I did. It's come out pretty well, not perfect, but pretty well. I may, before I call this map finished, maybe tweak it a little bit, but yeah, it was a kind of a last minute. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically undoing some of the work I've done because I realised I need to put a path through there. I think this is slightly different to the real Lido, and it's just about me arranging things so they'd fit into the map and the world that this Lido's existing in, really. And this is a pretty easy bit of sort of copy and pasting and putting features together. Quite easy, really. And it's at this point I was realising that all my faffing around at the beginning of making sure that I wasn't going to need too much kind of walkways and sides of the pole to cover up the wall, so it was all a bit unnecessary, really, because actually I was going to make it much bigger than I needed to anyway, so I didn't need to faff around as much. Now, one thing I will talk about a little bit here is I'm quite new to videoing whilst I'm playing games, and I use OBS to record, and I have a terrible habit of pausing OBS when I go and do something else, or I look at some reference material for too long and nothing's happening, or I go off and have a wee or grab a drink or whatever, and then forgetting to turn it back on and start recording. And you will notice a couple of times where features appear from nowhere a little bit, and that's because I forgot to record. So I do apologise to that, although I'm thinking this video is going to be, you know, close to an hour long, so I don't think you've missed out on anything too important. Now, here again is somewhere where the ground isn't level, and I should have levelled it beforehand, and the game doesn't like there being modular pieces there whilst you try and level the ground. It will stick the ground to the modular piece, so I just kind of lift the piece up and then flatten it and then put it back down again. It's a bit of a faff, but if I sorted myself out before I started, it wouldn't be so much of a problem. Here I'm just kind of tidying up the edges a little bit and making sure everything fits together. Now, you may notice, if you're eagle-eyed or not even that eagle-eyed, that there's not a great amount of, what's a good word? Things aren't entirely equal. So the left side of this and the right side of this are a slightly different shape. And I knew this pretty much as I'm doing it, and I didn't care really. I think it looks okay. It seems to fit together quite well. Here's remembering that I needed to have a place for people to leave the swimming area and then come down to exit the Lido, or go and have something to eat and drink, or just sit down. So I make some fairly hokey steps, and as you'll see here that the gap is different on each side because I have to stretch the steps, but again, don't care. Right, so back down the other end to work on the other end of the pool. And again, I'm just copy and pasting that curved area because I didn't want to do all that work again. And also copy and pasting the steps. Now, I did experiment with quite a lot of other things that I haven't included in this video. And I haven't included them in the video because I haven't left them in the final map, and they didn't really work. Part of me has kind of thought it'd be interesting to show some of the outtakes, not least of all because what I was trying to do, somebody else may be able to say, well, you could have done it like this. But again, I knew this video was going to be really long, so I haven't left them in. Right, so what I'm starting work on now is what is the main building that's part of the Lido. It's where you enter the area and buy a ticket and enter, or get changed and things like that. Now, these aren't the doors. I kind of looked at the reference photo and it seemed like double doors, but it didn't really seem to work. So in the end, I put the curved doors that you get with the game really, and I thought they looked a lot better. And I might have said on a previous video, but I tend to use doors as the starting point, as well as using them for measuring out the size of football pitches or Lidos. I use them as a starting point to work out dimensions for buildings, because it works really well, and you can like very much base the size of walls and things like that off doors. Now what I'm doing here is the textures you've got for the modular pieces that are windows, you can either just stick on the side of a wall, and I have done that in a lot of places in this map, and indeed in the Lido section. But I do think it looks better if you kind of shrink them into the wall a little bit, which is what I'm doing here really. So I've made the wall half the width that I need it to, and then put the windows on that, and then filled in around it, which kind of works. I think it does look better when it is shrunk into the wall a little bit, but it's a bit of a faff, and I don't always do it. I must say, this building, if you haven't seen any of the other builders in the game, you might not have, this is probably the worst building I make. It's the building I'm least happy with, and I've got a lot of bits to go back on and do before I can call this part complete. And mostly they're kind of fine-tuning and adding little bits, especially kind of what are they called in the game? I can't remember what they're called in the game, but adding little extras to the game and stuff. But this is the only building I think I could legitimately go back and completely remake. It's kind of hideous, and I bodge and I bodge and I bodge, and I just about get it done. It's a kind of a weird shaped building, and again, it is based on the building of the Lido that I'm basing this whole area on. But yeah, it's not great. It's not great. I think I just about get away with it. So there's that. But yeah, and it was kind of quite a difficult one to build because it was so idiosyncratic. So it had a lot of individual V-shaped roofs that merged into each other, which in real life look great and look fine, but when you're making it, they kind of don't look real unless you get it just right. And that's maybe just me, but that's what I find. Now the bits I'm adding here, now it's probably got a proper name in architecture, but where you've got two different materials on a wall meeting, if you put that edging, it just makes it look better somehow. I don't know why. There's probably a good reason for that, and if you know, please tell me. But I just think it looks better. If you like, for here you've got kind of a plastered white wall meeting a brick wall, and putting that edging around it just kind of makes it work, really. Here I'm just making the steps. Now in the real building it's a bit more complicated, and I just kind of oversimplify it here because I just didn't think it was important, really. So I just move it all in and position it, and I do come back and finish it off. Here's me double saving again very quickly. Now this I've probably only included about 50%, and this is at 10 times speed. I've only included about 50% of the faffing about I did to make this next piece of this building. Now what it is coming out on both sides of the building is a curved area that's kind of, it's hard to describe what it is really, but I guess it's somewhere where people can go and sit and leave their bags before they go and swim, or maybe have a chat or have something to eat and drink if they don't want to sit outside, somewhere they can sit in the shade or out of inclement weather. And I really faffed about to make it, and again I've really edited it. I tried so many different ways of making the curved shape and making each individual area work. Yeah, the angle when I copy and paste the next one isn't perfect, but I'm happy with it. I sit on it because it was fine. I'd messed around with that area for so long, I really didn't want to do it again, to be honest. See, I'm just finishing off these steps. Now the reason I've left it till now to finish off these steps is I was going to do steps down from that kind of raised covered curved area, but in the end I decided not to, because I think I experimented a bit and it just didn't look good. So in the end I did steps at the end of the area. Now one of the problems that I find in the game, and other people may not, but when you've got a building that's slightly off angle to the grid, trying to work out sizes and position it and do all that, it's a real pain in the bum, frankly, because you can't move it straight back and forth. You're moving it to the grid rather than to the angle the stairs are at in this case. So what I eventually do, I don't think I do it quite yet, what I eventually do is I take the steps, straighten them up to the grid away from that angle, then do all the other work I need to do with them, and then put them back and angle them correctly, and it makes it a lot easier. Now there may be a solution in game to do that, and if you know of it, please tell me, because it would make my life a lot easier. Now I have said in a previous video, the reason why I'm making this kind of strange park for a dinosaur park game is really because I wasn't very good at making buildings and I wanted to get better at making buildings within the game, and I thought the best way of doing that was to make a whole park that was just buildings. And then my imagination kind of went away with me, and I've done things like a football stadium, and I've done a canal, and I've done all sorts of things, and I do think I'm a lot better at making you may not see it at the moment, but I'm a lot better at making architectural structures than I was. And I do something a little bit, and I'll talk a bit more about doing that, but it's going to enable me to take the modular objects, whether they're toilets or cafes, and then build architectural structures around them that will fit the kind of park I'm making at the time in the future, and I think I'm going to be a lot better at it. Having said that, I do that later on around the Lido, and I don't make it very complicated, but as I'll explain later, I am making it in keeping with the area it's in. I'm not trying to make it really what's the word, fancy for no reason really, so it kind of does what I want it to do. So here's me making some probably too thin rails for the stairs, but I looked at it and thought, nah, can't bother to change it, that'll do. Which is, I do that quite a lot. Sometimes I look at it and think, that's good enough, we'll leave that. So that's the staircase is finished, and then I just take that back, and then I can curve it away from the grid and fit it back into the place where it's meant to be. And then take the copy and paste version and stick them over that side. So now I'm going to start doing, and this is where this building gets even more bogged. I'm start doing what is basically the front of the building. The rear of the building is actually where you come out onto the swimming pool, and this is the front of the building, and this is where the entrance will be for people who are visiting. And I don't finish it. I'll talk about it a bit later. I don't really finish that whole front area to tie it in with the rest of the map. I'll do that later. But this is where there's yet another roof that all merges in together, and yeah, I really make a dog's dinner of this. The end result is okay. It doesn't really work as a building. So if you were doing some level editing, like for a first-person shooter, which is what I've done in the past, this would never work, because if you went inside this building, you'd see how much of a nonsense it is. But when you're just creating shells for building, which most of the buildings are just shells, some of them aren't, some of them work as real buildings, but by and large most of them are shells. You can kind of get away with it and just bodge it so it looks reasonably okay from outside, even if it, you know, you go inside the building and it looks awful. So this building, even though I've kept reasonably to what the source material is like, I really and ah about how closely to stick to the source material, and I kind of do a hodgepodge of nothing like it and quite like it, and I do a little bit in a bit. I do a bit of sinking the window modular pieces into the walls a bit. And then on occasions I don't, because I got tired of it by that point. But I'm just kind of building the main outside structure, because sometimes I find it very hard to picture what it's going to be like. So I make as much of the structure as possible, and then as I'm adding windows and doors, I may go back and take pieces out and do it again. But to get the whole kind of frame of the structure done enables me to then understand how it's all going to fit together. Well, that's me anyway. Again, this bit I've edited quite a lot. I absolutely made a dog's dinner of this bit. Again, it is a windows sunken into the walls a little bit, but positioning was all out. And eventually I sorted it out in that bit there that I did there, but the positioning was all out. But I get there eventually. And I'm just nicking some of the step pieces from the rear of this building, and adding it to the front. And again, I was almost thinking, I'll just make this door just a stick-on, almost texture piece, but in the end I decided again to sink it in. The benefit of sinking it in as well is when I go back, if I decide I actually want this building to be accessible by guests, which I want to make most of the buildings in this map accessible by guests at least, so you'll see them as you watch the map function. You'll see guests walk through the buildings, and there's actually somewhere they might be able to get away from dinosaurs as well. They can walk through the buildings. I've done it on the hotel, which is the very first building I made. I've actually put toilets inside it and a route for people to follow. So actually, when I have run the map, it does mean that guests will actually walk through that building, and it gives them a reason. But yeah, so if you don't make it just a stick-on texture to the wall, it's actually easier when I go back, if I then want to make them into a real door, which means I'll have them, because I don't think we can have doors that actually open as guests approach them, which would be nice. I'll have to leave some of the doors open, and that will enable guests and or dinosaurs to go through them. So I'm just finishing up with the trim, which, as I said earlier, I just think ties it together nicely. Actually makes the building look like a real building and not something that someone's cobbled together. Again, this window I'm just sticking onto the wall. I've had enough by this point of this building. It's my least favourite building that I've made in the whole map, but it kind of works. And I stick some random doors, just, you know, because they would have doors there, I think. And then I finish the kind of path all the way around. yeah, so I just flip that round, and then when I go to connect this area into the wider map, this and a path I'm going to add in a minute is here I go, is what's going to connect it to the rest of the map really. Right, in this bit I'm going to start to add the cafe, and I decided I wanted to take a modular already made cafe, prefab cafe, and then break it up a bit and then make it more in keeping with the rest of the buildings in the Lido area, which I do, and I pretty much take out everything, to be honest. Everything that can come out and it still function as a cafe, I take out. The only bits you can't take out are some of the design patterns on the front. They're sort of tied in with the counter walls and stuff. So in a minute what I do is actually I build a little brick wall, about to do it now, over in front of that, which covers up that design, because I didn't want that design there. And then so basically what I'm doing here is I've taken, copy and pasted a section of that curved bit away from the main building, and I'm using those features to build up the cafe. And it's only a really small cafe, I haven't made it into anything big. It's meant to be just a place people can grab drinks and then go and sit by the swimming pool and whilst they're taking a break or watching someone else swim. And yeah, I'm just making a side round the back of the counter area so I can actually get out of it. Otherwise, when I did make an original version where no one could actually get into the building to actually serve in there, which was a little unrealistic. Yeah, so I'm really just doing this as simply as I can, to be honest. I didn't want to make it very grand. I wanted to make it just almost like it was an afterthought when they made the Lido. Well, we better give them somewhere to buy food. And they just stuck it down the other end of the pool. Yeah, and with that done, I just tie it all in really and put sides on it. I think I put a door around the back because I think you probably would have a door. Otherwise, how would you get in there and do your job? And yeah, that's pretty much a little Lido cafe done really. But as I said, it's pretty much my first go at taking one of the modular pieces and creating a bespoke architecture for it, even though, which was the whole point of doing this whole map, was to get better at doing it, even though in this case I've done it in a very minimalist way. It's part of what I want to be doing better in the future when I make other parts and other maps. Right, and with the cafe there, then we need to put some seats on the seated area, and I kind of quite like the prefabs you get with the game really, so I just use them. Didn't see any reason reinventing the wheel. As you'll see there, I don't measure those pieces particularly accurately. I just stick them by eye. Oh, it looks good enough. It's not particularly symmetrical. And then I tie in a wall around to the cafe and surrounding the pool area. And here I'm starting to do a little bit of landscaping, put some of the trees around it. The Lido that I used as reference does have a lot of trees around it, so it's not a conceit of mine. This is what a lot of them were like, and I guess it's slightly a privacy thing. Right, now it's my last minute addition of the fountain. Did I call it a waterfall? I meant a fountain. So it's basically just a circular pool with a very simple circular structure, cylinder coming out with water coming out the top of it. And I didn't really have to add much water. There's still quite a lot of water that I'd use for the swimming pool encroaching on this area, so it's just a question of picking up all my modular pieces so I could then sculpture the terrain and fit water in it, and then hopefully, then put everything back and put the circle back, and then there would be water in it once I'd got rid of the bits I didn't need. Yep, and this is where I remember to actually use the curved pieces to fit the sections around a curved area, which makes sense, but I basically forgot about it earlier in the build. So yeah, now I just quickly fill in all around the walking area and seated area around the fountain, and there I have a circular piece with some water in. Now again, when I get to fit some bits within the fountain, again it's really difficult because when you've got that bit selected, you can't see through the water in the same way you can when you deselect them, and it got very tricky. And again, I've cut some bits out of it that you'll see in a minute of me trying to put a base in this fountain area because it wouldn't show up, and then it would show up, and I wasn't sure if I had the piece too low or too high, or whether it was just because I'd selected the fountain area so it wasn't showing through the water properly. It was a bit of a pain, but I got there in the end. Again, this is me remembering to use curved pieces to fill in spaces, but still not doing it particularly well. It was a bit of a pain, and I was rushing it because I wanted to get on to make the fountain properly, and I was forcing myself to do this bit correctly first. So I'm squeezing pieces in, then checking around the back of the wall to see if they were jutting out through the wall or not. Right, so this is me fiddling with the side, and this is me making the base. Now why I made it circular I don't know. I could have just used a square piece because you'll only see what is within the confines of the circular fountain area pool, but I do it anyway. So I faff about a bit, and then I start to build up the sides of the fountain, and I'm just sort of copy and pasting the white bit, shrinking it to make a black bit, and then adding a similar size white bit on top. And then I kind of start making, from the reference it's just a cylinder really coming out of the ground that then water flows out of. And I hadn't used some of these more dynamic modular pieces like splashes and a bit of a waterfall. I'd not done that before, so this is my first time doing it, and I faff around for ages, and I'm still I'm never really happy that I've done it correctly, but yeah, I leave it as is. In the end I get to think, enough's enough really. But yeah, I think it's always difficult. I also find it quite difficult in Planet Zoo when doing waterfalls to get those pieces right, and I'd watch other creators make parks and use waterfall and think, why have you got such good results? And I'd do it and it would look a mess, but I sort of gave myself a few goes at getting this right, and in the end decided enough's enough, it'll do. Now, the idea for this whole city map, I'm just doing some lighting here. The idea for this whole, one thing I will point out just here, because I quite like the idea of it being quite atmospheric. I don't want all the lights to be working, but I want them to be present. So I don't know if anyone else does this. I just change the colour in the setting for the lights that I don't want to be working, and that means that they don't look like they're working. So I change it from white to black or to grey, and it means, I think you'll see on one of these lights I do it now, and that sort of turns the light off, which I think makes it a bit more atmospheric. But anyway, what I was saying about the map is, I haven't really explained the conceit of the idea of the park really, and basically it's going to be a city, and I'll go into more details on this. It's going to be a city where dinosaurs have taken over, people have left dinosaurs to it, and but some guests who are too stupid or too brave to know better go into the city to watch the dinosaurs. That's basically it. But how I actually segregate the dinosaurs, or if I do segregate the dinosaurs, I haven't decided. That's something I'm going to play with later. And yeah, as you can see from this bit, I've done a bit more lighting and I've done a bit more trees, and now I'm doing the fence which is around the Lido, because obviously people aren't allowed to just walk into the Lido. They have to go through the main building, buy their tickets, that sort of thing. And I just used one of the fences from the game. Towards the end, when this map's finished, I'm going to break part of the fence, which will explain how dinosaurs can get in there, because they can't go through the door and buy a ticket. Right, I think this is the final bit of work I'm doing on this, and these are the covers for the pool. And as you know, for most pools, especially outdoor pools, they have to have covers, and which are obviously retractable. So all I'm really doing is I've made a blue coloured cylinder, which is the rolled up cover, and I've made a probably slightly overcomplicated frame to hold it on, and then I just kind of copy and paste one of them to match the three that are needed. Yeah, so as I said, the park is going to be this park where dinosaurs have taken over the city. People have left them to it. Some visitors go in and see what's up. Now, obviously, at the moment in Prehistoric Kingdom, the guests aren't really nervous of dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs don't hunt the guests. But I am hoping in future updates of the game, when some of those behavioural responses from both animals and people will hopefully be part of the game, that it will make it a lot more interesting. My part rating will be awful, obviously, guests will hate it, but just seeing guests maybe deliberately going into buildings because they're safer, maybe not, and dinosaurs hunting people through the city, that's the sort of thing I like, really, will really be a lot more interesting as things go on, really. So yeah, that's basically the shape of, I'm just tidying up some additional pieces. That's the shape of the covers, and then I duplicate, and that's the finished Lido. So here's a little view of it at night. I think it looks pretty good. I will actually show the photo now of what I based it on, and a little side by side, and yeah, I think it looks pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with it. Now, it took me a long time. Again, it took me about 10 hours of work to get here. I don't know if you think that's a lot of time or a little time. I'm not sure. It's just how long things take me. And as I said, I've taken a little bit of a break, both from making videos and from working on the map, but I'm gonna start again pretty much as soon as I come off making this video now. And I've got one more area that I need to fill in. Probably is going to have 2 buildings. Then I've got that to finish, make sure everything's connected. Then I've got to put the surrounding wall. I want to put things outside the surrounding wall to the city. All of this will make more sense in the future. And then put some trees and landscape right around the city as well. And in landscaping, I don't just mean trees, I mean making hills and ways of blocking it in. Then I've got to work out all the text features. I'm going to add a lot of text onto things like the hotel, to street signs, all that sort of thing, and tidy everything up, make walkable sections to pretty much all the buildings, and then it'll be done. Now, if you want to look forward to that, I hope you do. I would also say at this point, I've got a plan for my next park, which is going to be actually something more akin to Jurassic Park. So I want to do something that's, if you were going to make Jurassic Park, what would it be like? And I'm going to make something that's more natural, and I've got a few ideas about it, but that's going to be my next part. But if you want to see more of this, you want to see it finished, you want me to get a move on, and you want to watch more of my videos, please like, please comment, please subscribe, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.